family, and welcome to this episode of Legacy Chat. My name is Rick, and I'm an alcoholic. I was given the gift of sobriety on November 17th, 1987, and it's my privilege to be your host for this episode. Legacy Chat is a podcast made by and for members of AA to share their experience, strength, and hope on all three of our legacies in Alcoholics Anonymous. And it's a service of takethe12.org. That's takethe12.org, a three-legacy study website. All episodes of this podcast will be available to listen to or download completely free on takethe12.org. The primary purpose of our time together is to create a discussion space of our three legacies so our listeners might be able to have a richer and more personal experience of AA's 12 steps, 12 traditions, and 12 concepts for world service. Legacy Chat is not affiliated with Alcoholics Anonymous, and neither myself nor any of my guests in this podcast speak for AA as a whole. We're only here today to share our own unique experience on one of AA's three legacies. On today's episode, we're going to be talking about Tradition 3 and our second legacy of unity. And I'm honored to have as my special guest with me today, Aaron P. Aaron, please introduce yourself. Tell our listeners where you're from, your home group, your sobriety date, and a little bit about how you got to AA.
Aaron, alcoholic. It's God's grace. I haven't had a drink since October 24th, 2015. I'm from Grapevine, Texas, and my home group is the Get in the Car group. We meet on Friday nights, and we just added a meeting on Monday night. So if you're ever in Grapevine, feel free to look us up, or you can go to getinthecar.org, and you can find our Zoom ID and password, because we are hybrid. I got a story just like every other drunk story that came into the rooms. You know, I live life self-will run riot, laying to be in places that I never existed I'd ever be in, never foresaw. And finally, God decided to bring me to my knees, and I finally reached out for help. And then from that day on, God intervened in my life and just kept putting me in places and putting people in my life to where I heard the message. And so I'm here today because of that.
I love that. Thank you. Thank you so very much. And welcome. Really glad that you're here today. So let's jump right into it. I'm going to read a couple of things to get us jump started from the forward of the 12 and 12. It says this: AA's 12 traditions apply to the life of the fellowship itself. They outline the means by which AA maintains its unity and relates itself to the world about it, the way it lives and the way it grows. And any time that we're talking about a tradition, I always think it's important that we read both the short form and the long form of the tradition. So I'm going to read both of them. The short form of Tradition 3 says this: the only requirement for membership is a desire to stop drinking. The long forms is a little bit longer. It says this: our membership ought to include all who suffer from alcoholism. Hence, we may refuse no one who wish to recover. Nor ought AA membership ever depend upon money or conformity. Any 2 or 3 alcoholics gathered together for sobriety may call themselves an AA group, provided that as a group, they have no other affiliation. And all of our 36, the 12 steps, the 12 traditions, and the 12 concepts have spiritual principles that underlie them. And I like to use the spiritual principle of membership inside Tradition 3, with the overriding idea of Tradition 3 that desire is all you need to be a member. And I think that the tradition pretty clearly states that. So first question that I want to ask of you is, when I reached out to you and asked you if you'd be willing to participate and be a speaker on this podcast, I asked you which step, which tradition, which concept you wanted to speak on, and you chose Tradition 3. Tell me why. Why did you choose this specific tradition to speak on?
Well, I think in light of what our fellowship's going through at the moment, I think this tradition is a very important tradition. I think the spirit of it is you know, instead of dictating that you must be an alcoholic, I think honestly what it's saying is all you need to be is an alcoholic.
Hmm.
We don't care about anything else. We just want to make sure you're an alcoholic. And I think we get muddled in that. And I think honestly, I think it's very important because what I've seen, and I don't have that much time. I mean, 6 years. I mean, that's a little bit.
Did you, I'm sorry,
And I could,
did you give us your sobriety date? I don't remember hearing it.
yes, I did. October 24th, 2015.
Wonderful. Thanks.
I see at some point that the group is where we do the 12-step work instead of me taking the 10 or 15 minutes to pull the guy aside and spend time, that quality time, to see if in fact they truly are alcoholic. You hear a lot of people sitting there saying that they're drug addicts, but I've found when you take that one-on-one time, and it can be 5, 10, 15 minutes, it comes to find out they truly do have the mental obsession of phenomenal craving that makes us different from the normal drinker.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we've lost base. I think I can be a member because I say I'm a member. In the spirit of this tradition, I believe it's saying you must be an alcoholic. And if you are, then you're a member. Does that make sense?
It absolutely makes sense. And I want to kind of unpack that a little bit. You use the word muddled. I think that it gets muddled. Let's talk for a second about what that looks like, if for no other reason than to create a space for people to recognize that muddling whenever they see it occurring. So how is it muddled in your estimation?
Well, I mean, I've been to plenty of groups. I've been to groups and there'll be closed meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. And somebody brought their kid. He was 17, 18 years old. And it was a closed meeting. We went around the rooms, introduced ourselves, said we're an alcoholic. And when it came to him, he said his name, but nothing else. And then the parent, who is an alcoholic, leaned over and said, just say you have a desire to drink. And some people, because they look at the short form and they go, oh, he's an alcoholic because he has a desire. He might not even have a drinking problem. I don't know.
A desire to stop drinking.
Right.
Right.
I mean, desire is a strong word,
Mhm.
you know. I mean, the definition of it is I want, a wish, you know. I mean, it's something strong. I mean, if I want to stop drinking, I mean, implies I have a drinking problem, and not just, oh, I'm in this meeting and I got a desire not to drink.
Mhm.
Or on the flip side, I've had the opportunity to sit down and talk with a man that 3 years in sobriety. He was sponsoring people. They weren't staying sober. He was dying inside. He called me up and said, hey, can we talk? Will you be my sponsor? And I said, let's go to IHOP. And within 30 minutes of that conversation over breakfast, he realized he was in the wrong fellowship. But at some point, somebody said, all you need to desire not to drink.
Right.
And I think we do it to ourselves as a fellowship as a whole.
Sure.
Because you can hear the back door, you know, smoking in the parking lot talks about how this fellowship's not doing it right, or we got the true answer.
Right.
And so for somebody coming out of treatment that doesn't really know, or maybe they think a drug is a drug is a drug, they think they belong because they have a desire not to drink, but yet they're really not an alcoholic. So they're not getting that message that holds depth and weight that we need.
You know, it's interesting. What you're sharing reminded me of a circumstance that I had been a part of at my previous home group. I was sitting in a closed meeting. I don't remember what kind of meeting it was, other than it was closed. It may have been a big book study, and that group at that time had a custom of going around the room and having everyone introduce themselves, if for no other reason than to make sure that everyone in the room was an alcoholic, because as we all know, closed meetings are for alcoholics only. But that it also allows a space for us to do exactly what you said in your situation, the example you gave of identifying those in the room who are not. One night that we were sitting in this meeting, and a young man and a young woman walked in. I'd never seen them before. And they sat down, and the room was full. I mean, there must have been 40 or 50 people in the room. And when we were going around the room and introducing ourselves, he introduced himself as an alcoholic. And when it came to her, she was sitting next to him. She introduced herself. She said, "Hi, my name is whatever, and I'm here to support him." Well, in that moment, and I don't believe that our group conscience at that time had any kind of process in place to be able to address that, but because I knew that we needed to address that situation in the moment, I got up. I was sitting on the other side of the room. I got up and walked over to her as the meeting was continuing on, and I leaned over to her shoulder and I said, "Hi, I've got something I want to run by you. Can we step outside for a moment?" And so she followed me outside. And I explained to her the difference between a closed meeting and an open meeting. And I said, closed meetings are for people who identify as alcoholics, who have a desire to stop drinking. And what I'd like to ask you to do, if you don't mind, is to either, come back and pick your partner up in an hour when the meeting is over, or there was a bench outside, or if you don't mind waiting outside, that would be great. And she looked at me and she was like, "Okay, that's totally fine. Totally understand." We walked back in. She walked over, sat down, leaned over to the man that she was with. And I don't know what she said to him, but the very next thing I saw, and the entire room saw, was they both got up and left. And when that meeting was over, I had several members come to me and say, "What did you do?" And I told them what I had said to her. And they said, "Well, Rick, you ran him off." And I said, "No, what I did was honor tradition 3 and the group conscience that closed meetings at that particular group are for alcoholics only." And it caused a stir. It caused a ruckus. But I still hold to the idea that those closed meetings are for alcoholics only. So I want to kind of put it back in your field to say, why is that important? Why is it important that closed meetings have only alcoholics in them?
I mean, multiple reasons. There's some people because of anonymity reasons, whether maybe it's their profession, their status in, their, I don't know, maybe they could be a mayor, maybe they could be the chief of police, maybe there could be a high-powered attorney that they don't want people knowing because of their outside life, per se, of being alcoholic. So a closed meeting is where alcoholics can come and they can feel comfortable knowing that it's only alcoholics.
Mm-hmm.
And majority of them will know the spirit underlining, spiritual principles with the traditions, and it's not going to break their anonymity, right?
Okay. All right.
And I mean, open meetings are, they're specific. Open meetings are for anybody to come see and hear what Alcoholics Anonymous is all about. I think over time, maybe it's just the meetings that I've attended, I don't know. That message is, and I'm going to use the word again, muddled in open meetings of Alcoholics Anonymous, because it is not the clear and concise of what AA is.
Which is one of the other reasons why it's important that only alcoholics are sitting in closed meetings, because it's the quality of message and it's the clear and
Correct.
adequate representation of our program, right?
Right. I mean, because I could be sitting in a closed meeting and we could be talking about things that somebody that's trying to check out and see if they are alcoholic might not understand what we're talking about, because the topic might be on step 11 in meditation and how it's important in our lives, or it could be all different kinds of topics that isn't really pertaining to what AA is. But somebody that has worked the steps, that is an alcoholic, that's been in around the rooms, they will understand that topic, or that topic might make sense to them.
Right. Absolutely. Um, I'm gonna move in a little bit of a different direction. As you know, we have our 12 steps, we have our 12 traditions, and we have our 12 concepts. Um, I jokingly have said with some other speakers that my guess is you didn't walk into the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous and see the steps on the wall and the traditions on the wall and concepts on the wall and then just like begin to embrace all of them. That, you know, our first legacy of recovery is what most of us get when we first walk in the door. At what point in your recovery did the traditions begin to become, or did you begin to become aware of them and have this desire to want to learn more about them? At what point in your recovery did the traditions kind of wake up to you, or did you wake up to them?
Well, I was blessed in the fact that God put a man in my life in that treatment center that was armed with the facts about himself and what AA was. So the very beginning, the very first night that we started talking, we read out of the book. And the forward of the first edition outlines a lot of our spiritual principles and the traditions. Now, he didn't necessarily say this is tradition 3, this is tradition 11, or
Right.
vice versa. But as we was reading it, he was discussing it with me. So very on, I was already introduced to it.
Right.
It wasn't much later, I was probably 6 months, maybe a year in, when the home group that I had in the beginning, I started questioning, because I was told from the very start that I need to be a member of Alcoholics Anonymous and I needed to be a home group member. And if I was going to be a home group member, that means I needed to attend group conferences. And I was also told if I ever heard anything in the rooms and I couldn't find it in our literature, I can do with it what I want. And so I was hearing things in group consciences, and I'd go back and I'd start diving in our literature, and it wasn't jiving what I was hearing. A lot of misstrued information, and it was a lot of opinions. And so it made me dive more into it. So I was armed with the facts, and I could present whatever situation was going up in group conscience with the facts and be able to say, you can go read about it, X, Y, and Z. So I started getting fascinated with the traditions early.
I've heard, and this is nowhere in our literature anywhere, but I've heard that the steps help the individual recover, the traditions help the groups recover, the concepts help world service recover. I've also heard it said that the steps keep me from, or can keep me from committing suicide. The traditions can keep me from committing homicide, and the concepts can keep me from committing genocide. That's jokingly a kind of an interesting way to put it, but I do love that in that it gets down to the meat of what the traditions are all about. And why Bill thought it was important to leave us with them, because knowing the nature of the alcoholic, the rebellious nature, the selfish and self-centered nature, I love that we have these traditions as guideposts, right? Rails along the highway, this journey that we have, just to keep us not in check, but in order, and making sure that we are not taking it upon ourselves to determine the who's and the hows and the whys. It's already been laid out for us. So in our traditions, Bill gave us some beautiful suggestions, and the essays that he wrote in the 12 and 12 on the traditions are just so amazing, because they flesh out exactly, you know, what they are, kind of in layman's terms. Tradition 3 is really pretty self-explanatory. And if you don't mind, what I wanted to do, and I've got this keyed up, and let's see if I can make the technology work for us, but I ran across, and I don't know if you've ever heard this or not, but it's a recording of Bill talking about the origin of the third tradition. And if you don't mind, I just want to play this real quick.
At about year 2 of the Akron group, a poor devil came to Dr. Bob in a grievous state. He could qualify as an alcoholic, all right. And then he said, Dr. Bob, I've got a real problem to pose you. I don't know if I could join AA because I'm a sex deviator. Well, that had to go out to the group conscience. You know, up to then it was supposed that any society could say who was going to join it. And pretty soon, the group conscience began to seethe and boil, and it boiled over. And under no circumstances could we have such a power and such a disgrace among us, said a great many. And you know, right then our destiny hung on a razor edge over this single case. In other words, would there be rules that could exclude so-called undesirability? And that caused us in that time, and for quite a time, respecting this single case, to ponder what is the more important, the reputation that we shall have, what people shall think, or is it our character? And who are we? Considering our record, alcoholism is quite as unlovely. Who are we to deny a man his opportunity? Any man or woman. And finally, the day of resolution came. And a bunch were sitting in Dr. Bob's living room arguing what to do. Whereupon dear old Bob looked around and blandly said, isn't it time, folks, to ask ourselves, what would the master do in a situation like this? Would he turn this man away? And that was the beginning of the AA tradition, that any man who has a drinking problem is a member of AA if he says so, not whether we say so. Now, I think that the import of this on the common welfare has already been stagnant, because it takes in even more territory than the confines of our fellowship. It takes in the whole world of alcohol. Their charter to freedom to join AA is assured. Indeed, it was an act in the general welfare.
I love that he said it was an act in general welfare. That you were tying it back to tradition one, that our common welfare, and that unity being one of the most powerful spiritual principles that we have. But as you were listening to Bill talk, what was coming up for you, or what was resonating with you?
Well, several things. Because at the end of the day, our traditions came out of collective experience. It was when we were a fledgling society, basically all our traditions came out because we did things wrong.
Right.
And so for this one, it's true. Yeah. Back in 1937, yeah, being a sex deviant, that was probably pretty tough, I would imagine. Right. And so for a guy going, look, I got a drinking problem, I need help, but I understand if you don't want me to be around y'all because of my other affliction. And it was at that moment. I mean, and I love that. I love that Dr. Bill flat out was like, what would the master do? Because to be Rolanos, everybody has skeletons in their closet,
Sure.
not just with drinking.
Sure.
And if it was only limited to you had to be a quote unquote pure alcoholic, nobody would be in our fellowship today.
That's right.
I don't even think the first 50 that helped write the book would have qualified. And so to me, this, what he's saying, and I'll go back to, what I said in the beginning, we don't care about any of that other stuff. We care that you're an alcoholic. And if you're an alcoholic, come all the way in and sit all the way down, because you're no different than I.
That's right. That's
all
right.
That other stuff doesn't matter.
It absolutely doesn't matter. And now, as an alcoholic who has a thinking problem, sometimes it's hard for me in the moment to be able to parse that, right? I mean, the perfect example was when I was living in Nashville, Tennessee at one point in my early recovery, and the home group that I was going to at the time was it was in a part of town that was I'm not going to say it was filled with indigent people, but it was a part of town that there were a lot of people who lived on the streets. And so oftentimes we would have people just wandering in off the streets, drunker than Cooter Brown and smelling like to the high heaven. And I remember, especially in early sobriety, because I didn't understand Tradition 3. And I didn't understand Tradition 1. And I didn't understand Tradition 5, that a group has but one primary purpose, which is to carry the message to the still suffering alcoholic. I would see that a person like that walk in the door, and I would just immediately get all judgy. Right. You smell, or you don't belong here, and I simply didn't understand, certainly, the foundation of this tradition, that everyone is welcome when they say they're welcome. And it doesn't matter who they are or where they've come from. I heard another speaker once talking about this on this topic, and they were talking about, and for those of you who have been around for a while and are seasoned in age like me, you'll understand this reference, that it really doesn't matter that if I'm sitting in a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous and a woman walks in who is a former Miss America, representative of the Florida Orange Growers Association, and has the name Anita B, or a televangelist with the name Jerry F, walking in, regardless of what I may personally feel about those people, it is my responsibility to make sure that I am responsible. I have to reach my hand out and welcome them and create the same space for recovery that I was given, right? And so they get, no matter who they are, no matter what they bring to the table, no matter how they show up, it is my responsibility to allow a space for them as well. Have you ever been challenged? Like, one of the questions I was going to ask you is, what are the obstacles that you have found in your journey that have gotten in the way of you being able to honor Tradition 3?
Man, I'm judgmental. I'm not clean as snow. I mean, and if it wasn't for this, I probably wouldn't be sitting here today, right? I mean,
Right.
I came in with a backpack, 2 pairs of pants, a pair of shorts, and a shirt. And taking a shower was not a regular event for me.
Right.
Even in sobriety, those first months, I didn't know, hey, you're supposed to take a shower every night. And so I know I went to groups smelling, but yet y'all didn't care, like you were saying, because I was an alcoholic and I wanted what y'all had.
Right.
And it was y'all's responsibility to make sure those doors were open to give me that. God's got a great sense of humor, because there'll be the guy sitting there half drunk still, but yet he's getting up after the meeting, he's walking towards me, and first instinct I go is, oh, don't come to me, don't come to me. Oh no, he's coming.
Right.
Oh my gosh, he's coming. Oh, why me? And then it's, hey, I'm Aaron. Nice to meet you. How are you? You want to talk? Because I remember what would have happened if nobody talked to me.
Right.
And I think we're all afforded the opportunity, if we want it, to have the clear and adequate representation of Alcoholics Anonymous.
That's right.
But
That's right.
it's up to me as a sober member of Alcoholics Anonymous. It's not up to the guy that's trying to figure this thing out. And I think that's why sponsorship is so important. And I think good, effective sponsorship would solve 99% of the problems we have as a fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous.
I could not agree more. And I'm glad that you kind of walked into that, because that was going to be one of the questions I was going to talk about, is about strong sponsorship and the importance of it, particularly around the traditions. How have you, because I know that you sponsor men and take men through the steps, take them through the traditions. What are some of the things that you've done in working with some of your guys on making sure that they have a full and rich understanding of Tradition 3?
Depends on where they're at in their mindset, because it's not, to me, it's not cookie cutter, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because some people might have a aversion to a different race, maybe because of the way they were raised.
Right.
So I'm going to have to go about this in a different light. But at the end of the day, the principle is still there, the tradition is still there, and the importance of it. I just might have to explain it in different ways for them to understand it.
Right.
But that at the end of the day, when you walk into the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous, I don't care if you're Black, if you're white, if you're Asian, if you're Hispanic, if you're gay, if you're a woman that wants to be a man, or a man that wants to be a woman. All I see is you're a member of Alcoholics Anonymous. And so when I sponsor, that's the same way. I'm not going to push my political, my Christian views, or whatever views on you, because that's not my place. And I'm not going to try to convince you and mold you into be something that you don't want to be molded to. But it's my job to explain to you in a general way, hey, this is what we are, and this is who we're not.
Right.
And because of Tradition 3, that means that everybody in this world is welcome, provided they have a mental obsession and phenomenal craving, because that is what makes us an alcoholic.
And the desire to stop.
Yeah, and you got to want it,
Yeah,
right?
For sure.
But at the same time, there's people that come into our rooms that have the mental obsession, the phenomenal craving, that at the time might not really want it,
Right.
but either they come in because they're court ordered and they got to come in. I still can't discredit that person too.
So it just
I
speaks.
still got to be there for them.
Yeah, it speaks volumes to the idea that we have to take each situation one at a time, right? And apply the work as it we know that it would best be received. So speaking of the group, speaking of coming in, what is the home group's responsibility to ensuring that the traditions are put into practical application, and that they're honored at the home group level? Like, for instance, what does your home group do to be able to ensure that its members understand, have a solid understanding, or at least some understanding of all of the traditions?
Well, we hold workshops. We hold a tradition and concept workshop twice or once a year, and then we also have a one every month. We have a tradition and concept study, and we promote it within the home group. We make it fun. We make it exciting, because a lot of people with years, they hear traditions, they go, ugh, that's boring.
Right.
And then if you even mention concepts, they just turn white and they can just glass over, because they're like, what is that?
Right.
And so we promote it. It's for fun. But at the same time, it's for the welfare of the group. And we try to make it a point that it's for, I mean, that is the main thing of the traditions, is unity within the home group, within the Fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous. And if a home group is practicing those principles within itself, each member, because it's going to take each member, I have to practice them in my life. And if I'm practicing them in my life, then it will in turn show up at group conscience.
And I'm really glad that you said that, because that reminded me of a belief that I have, that the traditions are important to me as an individual, important to me as a human being. I can take the spiritual principles that underlie all of the traditions and use them outside of the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous, right? This idea, I know that there are several organizations out there that have taken the foundation of the 12 traditions and modified them for their own use. I know Al-Anon has done that. In fact, I don't know if you still can or not, but there at one time you could go to the website for the Houston Al-Anon, and there was a link on there to download the 12 traditions. I forget exactly what it's called, the 12 traditions for having healthy relationships, or something along those lines. I also have an example in my life where I have a dear friend of mine who is about 10 years longer sober than I am. And she started a business in San Diego. And she had about, I don't know how many people, I'll say 15 or 20 people working for her. And when she started the company and had hired a director of human resources, she handed the 12 traditions of Alcoholics Anonymous to that director of human resources and said, build our company's policies and procedures around this document. And so the director of human resources did exactly that. And what was interesting was, I don't remember at what point, but I want to say 5 to 7 years after she had been in business, she was a member of the San Diego Chamber of Commerce, and the Chamber of Commerce had given her an award for the best small business in San Diego to work for. And she is convinced to this day that the reason that her company received that award was because she had used the spiritual principles found in the 12 traditions as the founding tools to operate her company. So I'll say all of that to say, can we take the spiritual principles that underlie the traditions and apply them in our personal lives? And have you had any experience with that?
Most certainly. If I go into any situation, and if I think about, okay, number one priority is unity, right? How can we keep unity, even if it's in a disagreement, maybe, or maybe you already know the viewpoints or whatever, like in relationships, maybe you got different views, but if you focus on the unity, things unfold usually in a peaceful, gentle way. Like tradition 3 with me, like with work, okay, you are a worker where I work because, for one, you got hired, but you say you are, right? And it doesn't matter if your English isn't good, or if maybe you drink, or if maybe you're gay. None of that matters, because we're all members of our profession. And if I can keep in mind, you're a worker no different than me, we both work at this company, and we're striving for that unity, all that other stuff doesn't matter. So therefore, I'm less likely to start judging you, because I'm not worried about any of that outside stuff. We're focused on the unity of how we can get this job done today.
We're putting principles over personalities, right? Whether it
Correct.
be the unity of the company or the relationship, the marriage, or it be that everyone that's here is clear about what the primary purpose is in a work environment. For instance, you could apply tradition 5 on our primary purpose is to whatever the mission and vision statement of that organization is, and making sure that everyone not only understands it, knows it, but is able to put it into practical application. I mean, there's all kinds of ways. But what I love that you said that I think is really important, that I want to put an exclamation mark on, is that the spiritual principles found in the traditions level the playing field and make it accessible and available to everyone. And they are, it doesn't matter what we bring to the table. It doesn't matter if I have murdered someone. It doesn't matter if I've robbed a bank. It doesn't matter if I have embezzled, billions of dollars. It doesn't matter if I have divorced 15 women. It doesn't matter, whatever. Alcoholics Anonymous levels the playing field, and the third tradition, it starts and ends with that. The only requirement for membership in this society is that you have a desire to stop drinking. And now it's interesting that there are times I've seen where tradition 3 is sometimes not fully understood. Give you an example. As you know, at our home group, and for our listeners, Aaron and I share a home group. At our home group, we read the yellow card, that was derived from SMF 209, Safety and AA, our common welfare, and it identifies the fact that at our group, Tradition 1 and Tradition 5 are of primary import, that we are there to carry the message to the still suffering alcoholic, and that group unity is paramount, and that nothing, absolutely nothing, no disruptions of any kind are going to get in the way, right? And we say right in our script through the yellow card that if anyone causes a disruption that gets in the way of us honoring Tradition 5 and Tradition 1, that you will be asked to leave and not return until you're willing to change your behavior. I've had some people say, well, you can't say that because that goes against Tradition 3. And the reality is that's not true. And the reason it's not true is because we're not asking that person to turn in their membership card to Alcoholics Anonymous. All we're doing is saying that in our group conscience, Tradition 2, we have decided that we're not going to allow any disruptions at our group that get in the way of Tradition 5 and Tradition 1. But the most important thing we can say to someone at that point, if they are asked to leave because they're causing a disruption, is, and you are welcome to come back when you're willing to change your behavior. To me, what that does is it doesn't violate Tradition 3. It absolutely supports the idea that we have one primary purpose and nothing is going to get in the way of that. What are your thoughts on that?
No, you're 100% correct. And you hit the nail on the head. And like I said before, sponsorship. That's why sponsorship is so important.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're listening out there and you haven't dove in the traditions or the concepts, because maybe your sponsor is a One Legacy sponsor, which that is not neither bad, that's not bad, right? Because you came in, you've recovered from a seemingly sober state of mind and body, your life starts getting better. But what you don't know, you don't know. So I can't fault you. So at that point, I've been given the gift of being walked through and taught of the other two legacies. So it is my responsibility, just as it is my responsibility to take a man through the steps, I have that same exact responsibility to take him through the other two legacies. So if you only have a One Legacy sponsor, I encourage you to seek out for a service sponsor. Because it starts with us. Because once we've gone through and we've learned the traditions, the concepts, now it is our responsibility to give back to the fellowship, because now it becomes our experience.
Right.
I mean, if everybody understood in our fellowship the true spiritual principle in what Tradition 3 is saying, we would not be needing the changes that people think we need today, as far as changing the safety guidelines, changing the wording of the preamble, having a plain language big book. None of that stuff we would need to be discussing, because everybody would understand I'm an alcoholic. None of that other stuff matters. And the sponsor works with that person to make them see what it truly means to be a member of Alcoholics Anonymous. The fellowship doesn't mold to what you want. Bill talks about it. We mold to these ideals, right? And we can either take them or leave them. But it's our responsibility. It's my responsibility.
Right.
And it was told to me it's my responsibility on day one.
Right. And we have to pay attention to that. We have to at least be willing to look at this. This is a selfish and self-centered disease, right? And I at some point have got to be willing to recognize that there's more to this than just me. And what is my responsibility to ensuring that this fellowship and that this society is here 10 years from now, 20 years from now, 50 years from now for my children, my grandchildren, my great-grandchildren, should they need it. And it's through conversations like this that make that happen, right?
Yeah, no, I mean, 100%. I mean, and we can have conversations like this, and you might not agree and you might disagree, but we can have conversations. Is having those conversations, I believe that's where the awareness comes from.
Absolutely.
Instead of sitting in the back corner, which I used to do, and shake my head and say, that's not right, and wagging my finger, that's not getting anywhere. But by me saying, this is my experience, this is what our literature says, go forth, come up with your own experience. But this is how I see it.
Yeah, and the beautiful part about that, Aaron, it's been my experience that I have changed my position over time. As I've grown in my journey, and as I have grown and accumulated a body of experience where I continue to learn more, whether it be through literature or through just plain experience, I get the opportunity to have my position changed. And I am not the same man I was when I walked in the doors 34 years ago, thank God, right? And so as a result of that, my positions and ideas and belief systems on certain things have changed. So, and how grateful I am for that. I want to do one other thing, a couple things before we head out. But one thing I want to do is I want to read just a snippet from the tradition study on takethe12.org. For tradition 3, and it's down towards the bottom. I have loved to go deeper and look at parallels and look at connections between the steps, the traditions, and the concepts. And there was a tradition study that was built out of a group in Southern California that I pulled this from, which I just think it is incredibly beautiful. And I think the name of that group is Unity Ensures Recovery Through Service. But they identified in their tradition study, and I've adopted it and used it in when I'm walking someone through the traditions, this step tradition parallel on tradition 3. It says this: the relationship of the third tradition to the third step is a profound one. The third step poses the question, what do I need to do in order to turn my will and my life over to the care of a loving God as we understand him? Well, the tradition answers the problem posed in the third step. The third tradition answers the problem. The only requirement I need to fulfill in order to turn my will and my life over to God, to God's loving care, is a desire to stop drinking. It is unbelievable that all the power of the universe is available to care for me if only I have one desire. I love that connection between step 3 and tradition 3. It just simplifies it. It makes it so incredibly easy for me to understand that all I got to have is a desire. Whether it be to call myself a member of the Fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous, or a desire to stay sober one day at a time and turn my will and my life over to the care of a God as I understand God. I don't know. I just love that. I think it's very interesting. Have you ever looked at that connection between step 3 and tradition 3?
No, I don't have any experience. I got to keep this thing simple,
right?
Because my mind can go all into different rabbit holes and stuff. So I have no experience whatsoever trying to parallel the steps and the traditions and the concepts. For me, it's almost like a checkbox. I mean, I got to keep them separate and individual, but I found they all kind of mold together anyways in my daily life.
Yeah.
And so I haven't ever dove into that and tried to look for that stuff. I can see, yeah, I can see how, yeah, that desire, the desire to seek and do God's will, which Bill said was humility, one of his definitions. You know, I could see where that could coincide, I guess, with a desire not to drink. But I know a lot of people that have a desire not to drink, and they're sober, mind you, but they have no desire to seek and do God's will. And they're usually guys sitting in the corner being the dry drunk
That's
or the
right.
bleeding deacon,
That's right.
right? So I can see where if, you know, one could, but at the same time, I can see where one could solely do one thing and not have the other in their life too.
Absolutely.
And they'll probably be perfectly happy.
And that's a perfect lead in into the last question that I have for you, which is on the idea of inventory. You know, inventory is, to some people, it's a big word, but I believe taking inventory on a regular basis is vital to the maintenance of my spiritual condition. Around this idea of tradition 3, what would, if someone was willing to, or needed, or was encouraged to take inventory around this, what would inventory look like? What do I need to look at to make sure that maybe something, that a liability in me that needs to be looked at so that I can better honor tradition 3?
You can go to, I believe, aws.com, and you can download the tradition checklist.
Oh,
I
I love it.
have found, and I have it somewhere. I was going to pull it and get it just in case if something like this was going to come up, and I failed to do that. But those questions are kind of directed as an inventory type style questionnaire for the group, but also for the individual as well.
Absolutely.
And one could do that. For me, it's simple as, because I'm judgmental, right?
Mhm.
Do I judge this person, keep them at a far distance because of outer appearance? Can't judge a book by its cover,
Right.
you know? And I can do that. And it's so subtle, just like, you know, doing the steps and continuing to do inventory. You know, book talks about, you know, our old ideas. Well, yesterday was all old ideas. Today I got to start fresh with new ones.
That's right.
What worked for me yesterday might not work for me today.
So doing inventory, just ultimately doing an ongoing inventory on a regular basis is important for sure.
Yeah, I think it's vital for spiritual growth, because you can get stuck and stagnant and I can play, hey, you know, when I first did my very first 4-step, I mean, those defects of character were big. They were outrageous.
Right.
But what I found, because of inventory process, those big uglies are the same ones that I had when I first walked into AA to the ones I have now. They just elude themselves differently. They're not as egregious. And I can sit back and go, well, it's not that bad. I'm not going to get drunk over that. But then I'm staying still. I'm not moving. I'm not growing. Right.
That's right.
I'm holding on to my old ideas.
Which would be the perfect definition of what it means to be dry, at least in my estimation.
Right.
You know, I want to highlight something you said about the inventory, the traditions checklist. That is a perfect suggestion to our listeners. You can go to, actually, it was created by the Grapevine. And you can go to aagrapevine.org, and I believe you can find it there, or you could just Google AA's traditions checklist and find it, because you're right, it does cover, there are beautiful inventory questions on there that are directed both to the group and to the individual. So I'm really grateful that you brought that up. We're about out of time. Is there anything that you would like to offer as a closing comment on Tradition 3? Anything you want our listeners to remember as they begin to put the spiritual principle into practical application in their lives?
Yeah, I mean, as you read the long form, there's a lot more to Tradition 3 than just membership, right? I mean, different groups, different meetings, all women meetings, men meetings, or whatever. I would like for the listeners to keep in mind, if you're going to a men's group meeting and a woman walks in As soon as you tell that woman to leave because it's a men's meeting, it no longer is a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. And the AA group pamphlet talks about that, and vice versa. So the tradition dives a lot into that too as well. But the importance, I guess the main thing out of all this is the importance of identification and our singleness of purpose. And it is up to us who are armed with the facts to make sure that that new person walking in the rooms get into the right fellowship that they qualify for, and they're not hiding out and then slowly dying. We have a lot of people in our fellowship that die because they think they have a desire not to drink, when in reality they deserve and they need to be in another 12-step program. And all it would take is a simple 5 to 10 minutes of our time, and pull them aside and just have a general conversation and continue to help. I think that is just as important to do as it is taking a man through the steps, is making sure and ensuring they get to where they can identify and get the help they need. Because in turn, that is their experience, and they're going to be able to help God's kids even more where I can't help because I don't have that experience.
Right. No, you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. Aaron, thank you for your time and thank you for your service. I'm confident that our listeners are going to be able to take a lot away from your sharing. So thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. It's an honor and a privilege.
You're welcome. Just a reminder to everyone that you can go to takethe12.org to learn more about all three of our legacies in AA through STEP, tradition, and concept studies, blog posts, videos, books, and so much more. Until next time, let us not forget Bill W.'s words when he said this: "We clearly see AA in 3 dimensions: the dimension of recovery, the dimension of unity, and the dimension of service. Without any one of these, AA couldn't function." God bless.